Parti de Gauche, for the far left, the Party of the Left, and George Prevalakis, who teaches at the Sorbonne, politics and geopolitics, looking a lot at Greece and its neighbors in the Mediterranean region. Before the break, George, just very briefly before we go on, you make the point about how there could be now a security crisis ensuing. Just in a nutshell, what does that mean? Well,
it's if the political system collapses, what happens then? I mean, what is the other option? We have a strategy or a policy from the European Union that failed already. And what are we doing? We are giving the same medicine and without explaining what was wrong. We do not have a diagnosis. We do not know what is happening in Greece. The fear is that the patient will die undiagnosed. We need analysis. We do not have an understanding of what is happening. We work with stereotypes.
Elena Panariti, the vote of confidence expected to pass, but how legitimate will the government be that comes out of it when you see those protesters outside?
Okay, I'd like to make a point right about the diagnosis, if I may, and then be happy to respond to the vote of confidence issue. I think, as I said, being an economist myself and having worked for the World Bank for more than 30 countries, this is not the first crisis we see. This is, however, the first crisis where the country that is suffering from it is not able to, on its own, decide its own way of doing business or resolving the crisis. We belong to a family of 17. We are in a part of a common currency with 17 other countries, and we need to follow the political structures with which the European Union has been put together to actually resolve a financial and economic crisis.
Regarding Greek voters, how much legitimacy will that government have?
The government already has legitimacy. It's the same government. We have had already a reshuffling of the cabinet in September of 2010, and now we're having another reshuffling. This is something that happens all the time. It's not something absolutely new. The distinction is, however, is that this vote of confidence is required because we would like to go further with our reforms and also with the austerity measures. The fact that the questions about getting or not getting a vote tonight, I think the verdict is pretty much out, and we believe that there is going to be a vote of confidence. What we are still working on is to get the vote next week about the austerity measures, and that's what the new economics team is working on since it's swearing in last I think Friday. But it is, however, not a liquidity crisis, and we're all treating it as if it is a liquidity crisis, and that's what generates a lot of upheaval among the Greeks, among the average Greeks. We are providing, if you wish, policies that are increasing taxes and increasing prices and reducing salaries and pensions. And it's getting to a point where we only see these type of measures, and we don't, as Greeks, see the outcomes of any real structural reforms. And I would have to agree to the fact that, yes, of course, we have a big bureaucracy, but we really need to concentrate in reducing it. And something else which is interesting to mention, it's not just the public sector, it's also the private sector in Greece, because the private sector in Greece is very much matched by the public sector. We have enveloped, if you wish, private entrepreneurship with public sector engagement.
All right,
so when one sector is sad and sick, the other one is actually getting pneumonia. It's a bit of the same contagion
let's pick up on that, because
country.
One of the main issues here is privatization, which was promised a year ago on the our Twitter feed. Emily Stryker writes, the whole culture has to be reformed in Greece. She asks, could you please enumerate all the assets up for privatization? What we can tell you is that besides the two largest ports, the waterworks companies, and tracts of state-owned land, we can perhaps show you now a list of companies that are to be fully or partially privatized under the agreement. They include the region's largest telecoms company, the betting company, OPAP, Hellenic Postbank, a stake, the trains. That is a long list. And just first of all, I want to first put a question to you, Elena Panariti. If that austerity plan is voted, when will we see those privatizations?
I think the right question is, why do we want to do the privatizations? And we need to explain that to the Europeans. We need to explain that to the average Greeks as well. The original concept of the privatizations was to allow more private engagement with higher technology and more innovation coming into the private sector. But if the private sector is so embedded and engaged and enveloped with the public sector, you mentioned earlier that we don't have a land registry. Well, we don't have many of the institutional infrastructure necessary for the private sector operate as a regular, appropriate private sector. So when we do these privatizations, we have to do them in parallel plans of actually establishing this infrastructure. And then we will actually have the results that we're expecting. If, however, we do privatizations without institutional reforms, without establishing the registry, for example, then it's going to be a mere selling out. And I think that's what people feel down there in the streets. And they need to get answers, which we are going to be providing them after tomorrow.
Let me put this now to Yorgo Chatzimarkakis, your German constituents. How do they feel about this? How do they feel about the fact that, listening there to Elena Panariti, she says privatization won't happen until there's the proper structure?
Well, the German constituents ask themselves what happened over the last year. I mean, the crisis broke out more than 1 year ago, and the government had put on their agenda to privatize earlier. They didn't. I have to disagree with Elena, and I have to say that there is no confidence anymore for any political party in Greece. I think what happened last week, the upheaval of people, was a divorce, was an official divorce of the people giving the political legitimacy to the politicians with the politicians themselves. I think both sides, not only the government but also the opposition, lost totally the confidence. I feel Germans think it's unresponsible also by the opposition leader not to take part in a national unity government and just to say, no, that's the job of the government. We want early or immediate elections now. This is totally unresponsible, and I think we have really to wait for unity government of all parties with added up by experts from, I would say, from the diaspora, because this is the part of the brainies, as you said, all over the world. Greeks from the diaspora have now to come back to Greece, like Elena herself, to help, but really in a new government of unity.
George Prevlakis.
Yes, I need to respond. First of all, it is not true that the responsibility is the same, because the opposition did accept the national government, and it is Mr. Papandreou that changed his mind. But I want to say something else. This is a very dangerous game to say that everybody is responsible on the same level, because we were giving discredit to the whole system, and the next step is what? Is it dictatorship? Those people have been elected. It is the only legitimate force in Greece. What we have to do is to decide who is right and who is wrong. If we say this is the game of all the mafias and all the forces that are trying to avoid reform in Greece, to say that the political system is corrupt on the whole, then what? The other option is dictatorship. I really don't understand. And this is a very dangerous game. It is very dangerous that the public opinion has been manipulated to consider that the whole political system is corrupt and that everybody is to be rejected.
But the sad truth of the matter is that the poor Greek people is being sold out. I mean, that list of enterprises we saw is frightening and makes absolutely no economic sense, because you cannot rebuild a country if you don't have the tools for that. And what's happening is that this whole public discourse on the ways of the Greek and this way of treating them like a bad-behaved child that needs to be grounded is just a way not to talk about the illegitimacy of the whole austerity plan. Because what is fundamentally wrong is the austerity plan, because that is not the problem in the first place. The austerity plan implies that what you were saying, the diagnosis, is the fact that previously there was too much money being spent in public services or in national enterprises, which is wrong.
Why did it happen?
I want to finish. And meanwhile, we're not talking about what really caused the crisis, which is that cloud of speculators, of bankers that are trying to get their money back. And how do we resist to that? And how we resist to that is by not allowing the banks, helped by that by the rating agencies, to get more and more money out of these poor Greek people. And that's why the European Central Bank should be doing its job as a European Central Bank. Yes, it's true that there should be solidarity among people that have the same currency. It makes absolutely no sense to think that we don't have to get out of this together. But we have to stand together against the banks, not against each other.
All right, and on this point, I just want to show what the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, said on the front page of the Daily Telegraph on Monday. He said that what's being asked of Greece is unrealistic. All it would take, he says, say the European elites, is for the government of George Papandreou to discover a crazed Thatcherite zeal that inspires them to sell every Greek asset from the port of Piraeus to Olympic Airways to the remaining marbles of the Parthenon. That should do it, they say. By the way, Boris Johnson, who advocates Greece dropping out of the Eurozone. And in part one, Raquel, you were mentioning Argentina in 2000. The default option, not so bad when you look at a graphic that was posted on the Economist's blog. There you see in light blue the countries before. These are the last the sovereign debt defaults. Excuse the writing, it's a little small. Before they defaulted and then afterwards. So the idea being that in most cases defaulting does give a good kickstart to an economy. Let me ask you on this, Yorgo Hatzimarkakis. Is Greece defaulting becoming more and more a serious option?
If the Europeans wouldn't have helped 1 year ago, the default would have been a fact. But the mistake was done by the Europeans, especially by the Germans, I have to say. If the German Chancellor in December 2009 would have said, it might be that Greece defaults, but we will do whatever to save the euro, full stop. The whole debate, the whole race of the markets, and Raquel has a point in that, would have been stopped. So I think it's also the responsibility of the Europeans not to have stopped this crisis very, very early. What the markets wanted to see is whether we Europeans help the Greeks, whether we Europeans stay united. We didn't prove that, and that's the result. So it's not only the Greeks who are to blame, it's the whole European system, and that's a pity.
Elena Panariti, how does the prospect of Greece defaulting and quitting the Eurozone seem to you?
I think we have to look at it in terms of trade-offs. We have to see who is bearing the cost of a default of any country. And as I said earlier, we're a family of 17, so it would be interesting to see what would happen if Greece defaults to the rest of the European family. And as a matter of fact, to the euro itself. So you're
alluding there to the domino effect that would hit other countries.
Completely. It has already hit other countries. So the question is, do we have the institutional infrastructure in Europe to deal with a crisis? That's what the market is testing. The market is sensitive. Although we have followed the austerity measures that we were supposed to. You know, I'm going to tell you something very simple. I have worked in bailout plans. I've never seen such a harsh bailout plan like the one we have received, and with the expectation that in 3 years we will actually finalize it. So usually they last for 10 to 15 years and they're lower in their interest rate. And this expectation is really, really tough. And we're not a developing country. We don't expect to start selling ores tomorrow and oil or whatever other natural resource we have. Our natural resource is our human capital. We belong to the highest level of human brain power in Europe and in the rest of the world.
Then why,
and we are not unleashing this.
Can I ask why then are they destroying that capital, that human capital? When you put down the budget, your government, the PASOK government, the PASOK government is obeying.
What is the PASOK government doing?
It's obeying to the IMF and to the Troika when it cuts budgets on education, for instance. It makes no sense to say that your capital is human.
What is the alternative?
Well, what is the
alternative?
Restructuring, keeping your money to put it into education, put it into your people, which I totally agree with you.
So defaulting and leaving the Eurozone.
Why leave the Eurozone? Why is restructuring debts with the private sector an issue about the European currency that is supposedly in hands of an institution which is public? I mean, it's a different situation. The ECB should be directly lending to the Greeks and not just putting them into the hands of the bankers and those high rates. I mean, they got a triple C this week, so this is going nowhere. This is just like De La Rua in 2001. All your austerity plans will lead you nowhere.
All right, quickly, a final word, very quickly.
You. But I think you're raising very many questions that I cannot respond, and I understand the time is coming up. But the only thing I'm going to tell you is that right now we're having an insolvency issue and a liquidity issue. So if we do not get along with the suggestions and the bailout plan, we will be giving zero to our pensioners. We will not have hospitals functioning, no services and no utilities.
Then we should stand together
against a final word.
I don't feel that our public has a clear idea after our discussion, and I'm afraid this is because we are talking too much economics. It's too confusing, and we are forgetting geography and history. We are forgetting geopolitics. We are forgetting that behind economics there are politics, that is conflicts of interests, that the Greece is in a geopolitical crossroads, that the interests are not only local but also international, that we have had a civil war. All those things, we have to take them into consideration. Otherwise, we get into an economic jargon and we come up in confusion and without understanding anything. It's very serious because geopolitics are going to be back in Greece, and Europe may be confronted not only with economic but also with serious security problems that may destroy the European project. If Greece becomes Serbia or Kosovo in a year or two, this is going to be extremely dangerous for the whole political European project.
For the whole continent. You're making a good argument for part two for this debate. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank you. I want to thank Raquel Garrido. I want to thank Elena Panariti for joining us from Athens. And I want to thank Yorgo Hatzimarkakis for being with us from Brussels, where the European Parliament is. And I want to thank you, of course, for being with us for the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's business, and we'll be joined by Tom Burgess-Watts.